Hello world! Welcome back to the Almond Force channel. In this video, we will be discussing whether certs, aka certifications, are worth getting. Before we begin, this will likely be a very controversial video, so I would just like to put the disclaimer out beforehand that no matter what I say in regards to the topic of this video, everything that I will say is based on the information and experiences I've had working in the cyber field. Now with that out of the way, let's get into it. Are certs worth it? This question has long been asked, but the answer isn't as black and white as people make it out to be. By that I mean some people think that certs are the golden tickets to cyber jobs, while others think the exact opposite, that certs are worthless credentials. I created this video to hopefully provide a final, clear-cut answer to the question based on empirical data I have ingested over the years, as well as my own experiences on this topic. First, let me start off by elaborating on what I mentioned earlier. Typically, people think of certs in black and white, in that either they mean everything or mean nothing in regards to their usefulness in landing cyber jobs. Oftentimes, the value of certs is made vague because people often only convey said value on these positive and negative extremes. This produces a misconception in those who are trying to figure out whether or not it is worth getting certain certs. In essence, this makes it very difficult for people to commit to getting a cert and for people to choose the most relevant certs pertaining to the jobs they are trying to obtain and careers they are going for. Certs may or may not be useful depending on the type of job and position or role that a person is applying for. What I mean by type of job is that jobs can be split into two main categories: public sector and private sector. Public sector jobs are essentially the government and government-affiliated jobs like working for 3- and 4-letter agencies. Private sector jobs are jobs that are non-government, meaning they aren't owned or regulated by the government like profit and nonprofit organizations. Now, public and private sector jobs can be divided up into further subcategories such as government contracting and military for the public sector, and retail and medical for the private sector. However, I will mainly be focusing on the public and private sectors as two separate wholes because certs can be applied inclusively amongst all subcategories in both sectors relatively the same. But certs are definitely perceived and valued differently depending on whether a job is public or private. I'll talk about public sector jobs first, since that's the type of job I've been most involved with. A lot of government jobs actually require certs in order to acquire said jobs. It doesn't even matter if you have an accredited master's degree or PhD. A lot of them will not look twice at you if you do not have certain certs, even if you have a higher level degree. This leads to a lot of backlash and issues within the hiring process for public sector jobs. From my experience, it is often a mixed bag when it comes to getting public sector jobs. Some companies are fine if you get the required cert within 6 months of hire, while others flat out state no cert, no job. The problem of quality is called into question here. Who is more valuable, someone with a relevant degree or someone with a relevant cert? A cert can take as little as a couple of weeks to acquire depending on its level of difficulty, and most do not require more than a few months to fully prep for, even if the examinee is a complete novice in the corresponding field that the cert exam would be covering. On the other hand, a degree requires multiple years of testing and professional studying in not just the target field, but also in other less relevant fields, with the advantage of becoming more well-rounded and professionally educated in other areas. In the end, degrees and certs are pieces of paper obtained from properly passing exams. But a proper education with multiple phases of testing and projects throughout the venture will always be better than prepping for a singular test that is very limited in scope of what topics it actually covers. Degree programs quite simply provide a much wider range of skills and utility than certs do. That's just a fact. Someone could have multiple different certs, and their quality would still not measure up to a professional education from a degree program for obvious reasons. One being the broad scope of topics that a degree program encompasses. Now, of course I understand that there are degree programs in colleges that are really dodgy and not very useful, just as there are certs that are also not so beneficial. But those are outliers and are not the majority for the discussion at hand. I am mainly referring to proper degree programs and proper certs in this discussion, so that we can keep the outliers out of the discussion, as they are not pertinent to answering the ultimate question that is the main topic of this video. I have another sub-question for you though. Which is more valuable, a person with 10 years of experience in the field, or a person with a cert pertaining to the field? The majority of people would think a person with multiple years of experience would be more valuable. Unfortunately, in the public sector, I've seen highly competent individuals with multiple years of experience get picked over by people with a cert. It is some of the wildest crap I have seen in the cyber field to date, and I've only really seen it in my time with the public sector. Part of the problem is HR doesn't really know how to hire folks for a particular job, as they don't have any clue as to what's actually involved with the job. In the public sector, this seems to oftentimes be the problem with hiring managers as well, because a good number of them have absolutely zero technical experience to properly deduce whether someone is a good fit for the position they are hiring for. I'll elaborate on the hiring process and woes of people applying for cyber jobs in a future video. All that being said, at the end of the day, I've seen more public companies value certs over degrees and experience, which should never be the case for the vast majority of jobs. Degrees, depending on the field, should be considered in lieu of certs. People who get degrees spend multiple years doing multiple tests that are often much harder and more intense than what cert exams have to offer. You also get professional development and projects that you simply aren't exposed to from studying for certs. It's also just common sense that people with multiple years of valid experience are way more qualified for certain positions than someone who just has a cert that fits a requirement on a job description. If a company really wants someone with experience to get a cert, then just pay for them to get it when they are hired on. Don't settle for less quality just because it fills a certain requirement immediately. If you're hiring someone with this type of mentality and mindset, you're just setting your company and team up for future problems and failures. This is probably the biggest problem when it comes to the public sector. A lot of it is this butts and seats mentality, where as long as the individual has the cert required, then they're hired. This prospect is the reason why a lot of public sector companies have high turnover rates, massive layoffs, and inefficient production. It's because they do not take the time to actually consider people with higher level credentials who simply haven't gotten a cert because they felt as though they don't need it, due to already spending absurd amounts of money on education to get their degrees, and or already spending absurd amounts of time as well in their respective fields. Newsflash, certs are not very useful if a person already has the skills and knowledge that the certs test them on, yet companies require people to get certs even when those people have more than adequate credentials. It's just a waste of time and money for people to get them at that point. However, a proper education is always beneficial no matter what level of experience you have, because it gives you that professional development and value that you would not receive without having gone to college or other accredited university or institute. Who created this false perception of reality, though, where certs are above everything else? I think, at least from my experience, it simply has to do with the fact that a lot of the people who are in management level positions do not know what the heck they are doing. Leaving everything to HR and non-technical managers is, for the most part, not going to find a company truly qualified and quality candidates. They want to hire for cybersecurity and IT to fulfill their contracts, but don't actually understand or really appreciate the field that they are hiring for. They just want to put butts in seats because each butt in seat earns them, on average, hundreds of thousands of dollars from the government. Again, this is from my own experience spending a lot of time in the public sector, so take it as you will. I know I've been going on and on about the public sector, but let's switch gears for a bit and talk about the private sector. I haven't spent as much time working in the private sector as I have in the public sector, but I do know enough to be able to discern some key distinctions between the two sectors in regards to certs. For one, private sectors view certs as more of a nice to have or preference rather than a requirement as public sectors see them. Now, of course, there are still some private sector companies that do require certs, just as there are some public sector companies that don't. However, once again, I won't go into the outliers as they don't represent the majority, so just acknowledging and recognizing that they exist should be enough for this discussion. Private sector companies are far more keen on focusing on the overall experience and/or educational qualifications of candidates rather than isolating certifications like public sector companies seem to do frequently. Now, that isn't to say that certs are useless. I know it seems like I've been saying nothing but negative things about certs, but it's not that I'm just hating on certs to hate on certs. I am hating on how they tend to be wrongly perceived and inaccurately valued. Certs, as they are meant to be, do of course bolster your resume to an extent. They often show consistency that someone is keeping up with their knowledge on certain topics or even broadening their scope to other areas in the field they are working in. However, this isn't always the case because a person's job should be keeping their knowledge fluid with their current work. It can be a great way to delve into other fields though and learn about them, but you don't really need to spend money to take a cert exam if you just want to learn about another field, especially if you aren't planning on working in that field. At that point, it is just a waste of your hard-earned money because certs are often overpriced, glorified esoteric tests. I will go more into this a bit later. Certs should be viewed as nice to haves on someone's resume, not the focal point. If you don't have any degrees or job experience, then of course certs are all that someone can rely on if that's all someone has. However, I wouldn't put all my eggs into that basket, as a lot of places only view certs as simply buzzwords on resumes to help HR and hiring managers select people easier and quicker for job interviews. Certs do not guarantee employment and should never be viewed or relied on in that manner. I would now like to clear up some myths I've witnessed and heard in regards to certs while we're at it. Like I said before, certs do not guarantee that someone will be hired. They typically only serve to help employers find candidates more efficiently. They do help someone to stand out more and be more likely to get selected for an interview, but under no circumstances, unless the job description literally says direct hire if someone meets certain qualifications, should certs ever be believed to be the primary factor for a job hire. This is of course with the caveat that someone has other things going for them, such as degrees, job experience, etc., that aren't just certs. This is probably already a well-known myth, but not all certs are created equal. This is mostly an issue in the public sector, where they categorize certs into different levels, known most notoriously as the DoD 8570. A lot of the classifications were clearly done by people that quite simply had no idea what they were doing. For example, they classify Security Plus and CYSA Plus as both IAT Level 2 certs. If they actually took the time to do their research, they would realize that the CYSA Plus is in a completely different level than its Security Plus predecessor. And this is clearly laid out on the roadmap chart that CompTIA, the company that created the exams for these certs, has publicly displayed on their website. As someone who took both exams and passed, I can also vouch for this on my end, but the empirical data clearly shown on their website provides a more accurate representation. My anecdotal evidence simply helps to corroborate what CompTIA demonstrates to be the case on their own website for their own certs. Thus, the DoD 8570 for the public sector is heavily flawed, and unfortunately a lot of government-oriented companies take it to be law for hiring people. This, in effect, causes public sector companies to hire extremely incompetent candidates in lieu of extremely competent candidates, all because they don't have a cert that probably isn't ranked properly anyways. Another myth about certs is that they are all made by highly skilled and trained professionals in the respective fields that the certs correlate to. Anyone who is professionally versed in cyber or whatever field the certs pertain to, who has taken a certification exam by companies like ISC Squared, CompTIA, EC Council, etc., should be aware that this simply isn't the case. There's a reason that a lot of questions on those exams are so obscure to the point where they don't make any sense and give you scenarios that are unrealistic that you would never see in the real world. It's because they are questions formulated by people who have never worked in cyber or IT or whatever field a day in their freaking life. Now, that's not to say that there aren't competent individuals working for those companies, but a lot of the questions are not developed by them. I literally came across several questions on the exams that I took that had no right answers listed. You may think that I just didn't know the answer, but I assure you that it wasn't just me, because there were multiple questions like that where none of the answers aligned with the scenarios that the questions presented. Other experienced cyber professionals have also experienced the same anomalies that I did and informed me about them. So I know I'm not just going crazy here. Going off the point I just made leads me into the next myth. Most certification companies could not care less whether you pass or fail their cert exams. In fact, I think a lot of them would rather you fail at least one time so that you have to take the exam at least once more. The reason why they have bullcrappers writing these questions is because they know that they are going to make money off people regardless, as they are recognized by the government as valid cert distributors. Poorly formed questions means that people will get those questions wrong and will have to pay to retake the exams, which just pockets the cert companies even more money. Obviously, I'm not saying this is true for every cert company, but if you think their intention is to actually educate you, that's not how most businesses operate in general. They want your money, and they'll hire cheap labor so they profit more off of you having to retake their exams because you got a question bank full of nonsense and convoluted scenarios. Another way I can drive this point home is through the study materials. Every major cert company has their own study materials that they promote and recommend buying because they believe their study materials will help you pass their exams. This is true to an extent, as the study materials do provide foundational knowledge for all the topics covered in the exams that will also be beneficial in the job you're trying to get or already have. However, when the questions on the exam are so obscure to the point where you are having to guess on every other question, this ultimately defeats the purpose of the study materials provided, to get you to pass the exam. The practice questions in the study materials, as you'll notice, often never correlate to the test questions. The exam questions are always vastly different from the practice questions. If you really analyze your test as you're going through it, you will realize fairly quickly that the test is designed to have the average person fail and have to retake the exam. Imagine spending all that money on study materials for a cert just to have to repay to retake the exam. Suddenly, you're realizing that you're spending $1,000 plus just to pass a cert exam that won't even guarantee you a job. And trust me, there are certs that cost much more than that just to prep for and take. So yes, just like degrees, certs are a money pit. However, they are still useful for your resume, and if you already have a job, then I would get your company to pay for them. In addition, if you have a degree, then I wouldn't even bother with them unless your company really requires you to get them. One last myth I would like to cover is that certs guarantee you a raise or higher salary negotiation for a job. This isn't always a myth, but I myself have never been offered more money for having the certs that I do. In fact, I lost more money rather than gaining it, as I had to pay for the certs myself. I do have a friend that was working IT help desk for a while who said that his company would give out guaranteed raises if they got their Security Plus. This is not something you would know though unless you were already working in that company and someone tells you about it. Thus, this is highly unreliable and shouldn't be assumed when starting work at a company. Another example for this case is one of my friends has over 10 times the number of certs that I do, but I make more than him, though only by a small margin. We have comparative degrees, experience, and job titles as well, so the only real differentiating factor is how many certs we have and the quality of certs we have. He has far more certs that are higher level than the ones I have, so it just goes to show you that certs are not the defining factor of whether someone is going to be making more money when getting hired for a job. Although, as I've said before, some people are under the misconception that they are. I would just like to reinforce that just as certs do not guarantee jobs, they also do not guarantee raises. Now, here's some advice when considering certs and jobs that you want to get. If a job requires a certain cert in its description, go ahead and apply because there's a chance that the company will go ahead with hiring you and allot you time to go acquire the cert while you are working for them. Don't let other people or coworkers peer pressure you into getting certs. I let my fellow coworkers peer pressure me into getting my second cert, and I've never needed it. All that came of it was that I lost money out of it. It isn't necessary to get any certs that you do not need unless you have some money to blow and just want the certs for your own achievements. Ensure that there are no strings attached with your company when they are going to pay for a cert they want or require you to get. I've had to pay back the company that I got my first cert from because I didn't stay at that company for the full 2-year tenure that they require whenever they pay for any sort of educational endeavor for you. This should be obvious, but never get a cert for a company that you are already working for if they aren't willing to pay for it. That includes giving you time at work to study for it because it is unreasonable to expect you to study for a cert on your own time if the company is requiring you to get a specific cert. The company should be paying for both the cost of the cert and the hours necessary to study for the corresponding cert exam. Don't waste your precious life away by spending hours upon hours after work studying for a cert that your company is forcing you to get. It's not worth it. Trust me. Always go for certs that either don't expire or, at the very least, have a continuing education option. Continuing education usually involves uploading some documentation for certain events or training that you've attended that are relevant to the cert you acquired in some way, along with an annual fee. It is not as common as it used to be, but some certs will expire after a certain amount of time, and you will have to retake the exams if you want to renew the certs. You want to avoid these certs if at all possible because they will be the most cost-inducing types of certs that you can go for. One last piece of advice I have for you is to try not to fail the cert exam if your company is paying for it. Take as much time as you need, within reason, to study and fully prepare for the cert exam. Oftentimes, companies will make you pay all that money back with interest if you fail the exam because they still expect you to get the cert. Some companies will lay you off or even fire you if you don't get the cert they want within a specified time frame. Before you know it, you may be spending hundreds and sometimes even thousands of dollars to acquire a cert that you could have gotten had you just studied a little more. And you may even be out of a job on top of that. This is a worst case scenario, but it does happen more frequently than you think, and people end up getting screwed over because of it. It is often the case that some people are very smart and are highly competent at what they do, but are poor test takers. So they end up getting shafted by their companies all because they couldn't pass a stupid exam that a majority of the time gives zero attestment to a person's actual skill level. If companies, especially those in the public sector, gave more credence to a person's actual skill level rather than relying on a faulty exam to appraise a person's skill level, the cyber and tech job market in general wouldn't be nearly as saturated as it is today. Let's reel it all in now. Are certs worth it? To summarize, certs are useful when you have no other qualifiers on your resume and are even more useful if you are going for public sector jobs because of the misconception they have about the true value and worth of certs in general. They also serve to add buzzwords to your resume that will overall bolster your resume in terms of job searching and landing job interviews. However, they are not the end-all be-all, as educational feats like accredited degrees as well as years of relevant experience are going to overshadow certs on your resume, especially for private sector jobs. So in conclusion, certs are worth it depending on where you stand at with your career and how much you've already accomplished. Do not waste your money if it isn't necessary, as certs are overly expensive and are often set up in such a way that the scenarios presented in their questions are unrealistic and deliberately obscure. Hence, they are often designed to make you fail and have to retake their corresponding cert exam one or more times, so that these cert companies can stay in business. Well, hopefully I was able to provide my in-depth viewpoint on answering the presented question by thoroughly analyzing the circumstances surrounding the question via empirical evidence as well as my own experiences. I hope you were also able to understand the points I was making and have a clear understanding of how certs are perceived and what their true value is and should be depending on the circumstances. I would also like to once again clarify that I am in no way trying to prevent you or discourage you from getting any certs. You can do whatever you want to. It is your career, and ultimately, you choose what you want to do to enhance and advance it. I'm just here to provide my take on certain matters and topics in cyber, such as the one in this video, to help guide you down a better path so that you do not make the same mistakes that I did. All that being said, please just be very cautious and wary with certs, and make sure you assess and take into consideration every aspect and possible outcome that you can before committing to paying for and taking any cert exams. Because if you don't, the potential consequences that might impact your job, finances, and life negatively, especially if you don't pass the exam, could be catastrophic. And with that, if you enjoyed the video, drop a like and subscribe to the channel to show your support. Turn on post notifications to get regular injections of cyber content directly into your feed. Check out our Patreon, join our Discord, and follow us on Twitter. Links in the description box down below. And leave any feedback or questions in the comments section down below. This is Almond Milk. Thanks for watching. Goodbye, world.